The night Nathan sat on the cracked leather couch with the foreclosure notice trembling in his hand, something inside him shattered, quietly, like the rest of him had always been. The world didn't stop. The clock kept ticking. But for Nathan, time split, before and after the betrayal. He had spent a lifetime filling the spaces others left behind, working double shifts, canceling vacations, skipping birthdays and doctor's appointments, not his own, but his mother's, his father's, even his brother's. He was the family's dependable background character, the steady pair of hands behind the scenes. No spotlight, no praise, just expectation. And he met it, every single time. Jason, on the other hand, had been fireworks, charismatic, wild, impulsive, the type who threw business ideas at the wall and watched them crash to the floor, glassy-eyed with optimism. He failed upward, always cushioned by the soft landing their parents provided, paid for, more often than not, by Nathan's quiet sacrifices. So when Jason's last doomed startup fell apart, and he was weeks away from bankruptcy, it wasn't Jason who picked up the phone. It was their parents. "Nate, it's the family name at stake," his father had said, with the weary authority of someone used to getting what he wanted. His mother's voice had cracked through the receiver like static. "Jason just needs a little help. He'll pay it back in no time. You know how he is." Yes, Nathan knew exactly how Jason was. He also knew they wouldn't ask Jason to do something hard. They never did. They came to him. Because Nathan was good with money. Because Nathan always pulled through. Because Nathan wasn't like Jason. So he took out the loan. Not for himself, never for himself, but to save the family name. That invisible heirloom everyone seemed to worship, even as it rusted from neglect. That was 18 months ago. Jason had since moved to Florida, where he'd opened a beachside bar and flooded Instagram with pictures of mojitos, boat parties, and sunsets. His latest caption read, "Living the dream, no regrets." Nathan, meanwhile, was eating microwaved ramen in the dark, afraid to turn on too many lights because he wasn't sure how long he could keep up with the utilities before they were shut off. Then came the letter from the bank. The payment was overdue. Collections had failed. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 30 days unless full repayment was made. He had no choice. He sold his car, drained the last of his savings, and made the payment. Then, angrily, stupidly, and against his better judgment, he called home. His father answered, voice casual, like Nathan might be calling about the weather. When Nathan explained about the letter, the car, the debt, there was a pause. Then came the response that would hollow him out completely. "Jason just needed a start," his father said. "You've always been the strong one. We knew you'd pull through." There it was, the family motto. Not spoken, but lived. Let Nathan carry it. He hung up without saying goodbye. That night, for the first time in years, Nathan didn't sleep. Not because of anxiety, he was used to that, but because of the clarity that had settled over him, like a blade across the skin. His life was not his own. It never had been. He had been raised, trained, and emotionally manipulated to be the family's support beam while Jason swung from the chandelier, and he was done. The next morning, he put on his only clean button-up, walked into a lawyer's office, and began the process of filing a civil lawsuit against his brother for fraud and breach of verbal contract. The lawyer, a woman named Lauren with sharp eyes and a voice like cold steel, asked the questions that no one in his life had ever bothered to ask. "Did you have a written agreement?" "No," Nathan admitted. "It was all verbal, but I have text messages confirming the transfer and voicemails from my parents promising Jason would pay it back." She nodded, unfazed. "Then we can build a case." It was surreal. Someone believed him. Someone was on his side. For once, Nathan wasn't cleaning up after a mess. He was creating a line in the sand and stepping over it. Later that week, he blocked his parents' numbers. He knew there'd be fallout. Guilt-laced voicemails, dramatic family group chats, cousins texting, "You okay, man? Your mom's worried." But it didn't matter. Let them worry. Let them, for once, live in the aftermath of their own decisions. He moved out of the family home. Yes, he still lived there, in the basement, paying half the mortgage, and into a tiny studio apartment. The wallpaper peeled, the toilet whined, but it was his. He stood in the middle of the empty living room that night. No furniture, just him and the whir of the fridge. And for the first time in his adult life, he didn't feel like he was waiting for permission to live. He wasn't the safety net anymore. He wasn't Jason's backup plan. He wasn't a dutiful son buying love in monthly installments. He was Nathan, 32 years old, legally suing his brother, estranged from his family, starting from zero, and finally, building a life that belonged only to him. The apartment was small, just one sunlit window, a creaky floorboard near the bed, and a kitchen so narrow Nathan had to turn sideways to open the fridge. But it was his. No family portraits, no echoes of footsteps above him, just quiet, clean quiet. In the early days, he floated through it like a ghost, not quite believing he was allowed to be alone, to not answer to anyone. The absence of obligation felt fictional. He'd wake in the night, heart racing, convinced he'd forgotten to do something. Check a bill, fill a prescription, cover someone's rent, and then he'd remember no one was leaning on him anymore. He'd gotten a job at a nonprofit downtown. Nothing glamorous, modest pay, but he liked it. He liked how people said thank you and meant it. He liked how no one expected him to sacrifice weekends or lie for someone else's mistakes. Most of all, he liked that he could go home without guilt clinging to his coat like lint. And yet, peace didn't come clean. Memories came instead. They struck during the smallest moments, burning toast, folding laundry, a woman at the bus stop laughing like his mother used to when Jason told a joke Nathan had written. Little cracks in the new glass of his life. One night, as he fixed a loose button on his work shirt, the memory returned so vividly it stopped his fingers. He was 11. Jason had just crashed their dad's truck into the neighbor's fence. Their father's face had been purple with rage until Nathan blurted out, "I dared him to do it." He'd taken the punishment, grounded for 2 months. No video games, no sleepovers. Jason had looked at him with something between gratitude and confusion. Their father had clapped him on the shoulder saying, "See, now that's a real brother." The needle slipped and pricked Nathan's thumb. The pain grounded him, but didn't soften the ache in his chest. He thought of Sarah. She'd been kind, patient, the type of person who asked how your day was and actually wanted the answer. She wasn't scared off by his silences or the way he winced at compliments like they were blows. But when she reached for his hand, sometimes he flinched, emotionally, if not physically. Not because he didn't want to trust her, because he didn't know how. How do you believe someone won't leave you when the people who raised you only stayed so long as you served them? Meanwhile, back at the house he'd left behind, things were beginning to unravel. Jason had tried to fill the vacuum Nathan left. For a week, he made coffee for their dad in the morning, drove their mom to her doctor's appointment, and even attempted to balance the accounts before getting frustrated and tossing the bills onto the floor. "I don't get why Nathan made this look so easy," Jason muttered, as their father scowled at the mess. "Because he didn't complain every 5 minutes," was the response, sharp and dry. Jason stood frozen for a second, then the mask slipped. "Maybe that's because he was afraid to complain," he snapped. "Maybe he was just tired of carrying all of you." The silence in the room was icy. Their father didn't yell. He didn't need to. He just stared at Jason like he was already a disappointment. Jason stormed out, but the words, his own, echoed. Maybe Nathan wasn't weak. Maybe he was just exhausted. It was a thought he'd never allowed himself to entertain, until now. A week later, Nathan ran into his mother outside a grocery store. She looked older than he remembered, tired around the eyes. Her hair dyed too dark, like she was trying to cheat time. "Nathan," she said, like she hadn't seen him in years, like he hadn't paid for her surgery, like she hadn't once said, "We love you, but Jason needs more." He gave a polite nod but didn't smile. She stepped closer, tentative. I heard about the lawsuit." He said nothing. "I just want you to know," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry for everything." The words didn't move him, not because he didn't want to hear them, but because they didn't ring true. She wasn't really looking at him. She was looking through him, at her own guilt, her own discomfort. He took a breath, steady, clear. "Are you apologizing because you understand what you did to me? Or because you feel bad about how you look now that I'm not around to clean up after everyone?" Her eyes widened. "Nathan, that's not fair." He cut her off. What's not fair is spending your entire life trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. What's not fair is watching your brother get praised for breathing while you worked yourself into the ground." She blinked, stunned. "You don't want to understand," he said, voice low but strong. "You just want me to shut up." It was the first time he'd said something like that to her. The first time he hadn't bitten his tongue to keep the peace. He walked past her then, shopping bag in hand, heart pounding, but not from fear, from freedom. She called his name once, softly, like maybe she'd cry, but he didn't turn around. That night, Nathan sat in his tiny kitchen with the window open, letting the sounds of the city drift in. Laughter from the diner down the street, a dog barking, wind in the trees. He thought about Sarah. He thought about the bruises no one sees, the ones that bleed out in your choices, in who you let in and who you push away. He picked up his phone. "Hey, sorry I've been distant. Want to get dinner this week?" A minute passed, then her reply lit up the screen. "I'd love that. Thursday?" Nathan smiled. For the first time, it felt like the start of something. Not a performance, not a duty, just a life, his. The restaurant was small and softly lit, nestled on the edge of the old district where ivy climbed the brick walls and menus came on recycled paper. Nathan had walked past it dozens of times on his way home from work, but never stepped inside. That night, with Sarah waiting by the window, it felt like stepping into another life. She smiled when she saw him, warm, genuine, with none of the guarded calculation he was used to reading on faces. He smiled back, stiffly at first, then a little more naturally when she motioned for him to sit. "Glad you made it," she said, sliding over a small dish of olives. "I was beginning to think you were going to ghost me." He laughed softly, the sound unfamiliar in his own throat. "I'm trying this new thing, showing up." Dinner started easy. They talked about work, about the terrible coffee in both their offices, the strange man on the bus who serenaded strangers with 80s ballads. Nathan found himself leaning in, joking back, even letting her touch his hand when she reached across to grab the salt. But then the conversation shifted, not abruptly, gently, like someone inching open a door. She asked, "Do you talk to your family much?" He looked down at his fork, twisting it in his fingers. "Not really." Sarah didn't push. She just nodded, waited. Nathan felt it then, the instinctive urge to bolt, not physically, but emotionally, to shut down, make a joke, pivot the conversation. He had spent his entire life pretending he was fine, that things didn't hurt, that the silence he swallowed was noble, not corrosive. "I used to think," he paused, voice tight, "if I just worked harder, if I kept being useful, one day they'd see me. Not just use me, but actually see me." He regretted saying it instantly. It felt too raw, too naked. But Sarah only looked at him, steady and soft. "You don't have to earn love like that," she said. "Not from me." It terrified him. How kind that sounded. How unfamiliar. He didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. Elsewhere in the house Nathan had abandoned, things were beginning to crack. Jason had tried to fill the silence at first. He'd started managing the bills, driving their mother to appointment, even fixing the squeaky gate that Nathan had once oiled every month like clockwork. It didn't take long before the tasks began to pile up like bricks, one after another, until the weight pressed on his shoulders in a way he'd never known. One night, after dinner, Jason stood in the kitchen doorway, watching his father nurse a glass of scotch. "I've been thinking," Jason began, careful, measured. "Maybe I could take over part of the accounting. I've been reading up on it. Thought maybe we could go over things together." His father didn't look up. "You think reading a few articles makes you capable of handling that?" Jason stiffened. "I just meant, I'm trying to help, really help, the way Nathan used to." That made his father look up. "He didn't just help," he said. "He did what was necessary, without whining about it." Jason's mouth tightened. Maybe he didn't whine because he knew you wouldn't listen. The silence that followed was a slap. His father stood, slow and deliberate, walked to the sink, and dumped the rest of his drink. "You're not Nathan," he said without turning around. "You never will be." Jason didn't respond. He stood frozen in the doorway long after his father left the room. And for the first time, he didn't feel angry at Nathan for being the golden sun in their father's eyes. He felt ashamed. Meanwhile, miles away, Nathan checked his mailbox late that evening. The usual, a flyer, an electricity bill, and then a small envelope, handwritten, no return address, but he knew the handwriting like he knew his own. "Mom," he froze on the front step. The envelope was thick, more than a card, a letter, a real one. He didn't open it. Instead, he sat on the stairs, the paper warm in his hand from the last of the sun. He looked at the seal, the way her handwriting curved, the slight smudge where she'd pressed too hard with the pen. He knew it wasn't another apology for appearances. If it were, she would have called. This was something else. He could feel it. A part of him, the old part, wanted to tear it open, devour every word, search for absolution, but he didn't. He stood, walked inside, placed the letter gently on the table next to his keys, and poured himself a glass of water. He'd read it, maybe, but not tonight. Tonight, he wasn't answering anyone else's needs. Tonight, he didn't belong to their narrative. For the first time, Nathan was choosing to pause, not out of pain or protest, but because he was allowed to. Because healing didn't mean rushing. Because boundaries weren't silent, they were strength. The letter sat on Nathan's kitchen table for 3 days. It moved slightly, closer to the edge, then back to the center, as if by accident, but always within view. Each time he passed it, he'd glance at the handwriting and feel that familiar old tension tighten in his gut, but he didn't open it. On the 4th morning, Nathan woke early. The apartment was still and pale with dawn light. He made coffee, sat at the table, and stared at the envelope like it might blink first. Then he picked it up, slid it into a drawer, and left for work. It wasn't avoidance anymore, it was control. That same afternoon, Jason stood on Nathan's doorstep. No warning, no message, just him, shifting awkwardly in a hoodie that didn't quite fit, holding 2 cups of coffee from the shop Nathan used to take him to when they were teenagers. Nathan opened the door and stared at his brother in silence. Jason gave a nervous half smile. "I brought peace offerings, sugar-free, like you used to like." Nathan didn't smile. "I still do." He stepped aside. Jason walked in like he didn't recognize the space, which in truth, he didn't. It was the first thing Nathan had ever built entirely without him, without them. They sat at the table. The envelope was gone now, replaced by a stack of receipts Nathan had been sorting. No trace of the past, no invitation. "So," Jason started, "I wanted to talk. Not like before. No guilt trip, no excuses." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Okay." Jason rubbed his palms against his thighs. "Dad's been a nightmare. Surprise, I know. But ever since you left, it's like I've been expected to be you, and I'm not. I thought it'd be easy. Do the errands, show up a bit, get a few compliments, but it's not like that." Nathan didn't respond. Jason kept going. "I thought you were just the background guy, the one who didn't have the guts to say no. But I get it now. You weren't weak. You were surviving, and I made that harder. For a long time." Nathan's hands were steady around his mug. "Why are you really here?" Jason's mouth opened, then closed again. "I don't know. I guess I wanted to say I'm sorry, not just because you bailed me out or because I screwed up the loan, but because I made fun of you for years, for being quiet, for caring." He looked down. Turns out, it's a hell of a lot easier to mock someone than to carry what they're carrying. A long pause. Nathan leaned back in his chair. "You want forgiveness?" Jason looked up. "I don't know. Do I deserve it?" Nathan shook his head slowly. "It's not about what you deserve. It's about what I'm willing to carry." Jason blinked, absorbing that. "I'm not angry anymore," Nathan said. "But I'm not jumping back into the family group chat. I'm not covering bills or being your fallback plan. I'm not interested in proving I'm worth something to people who only noticed me when they needed saving." Jason nodded. "I get that." Another silence. Then he stood. "If you ever want to talk," Jason said, "for real, I'll be around. I'm trying." "I can see that," Nathan said, not unkindly. "That's good." They didn't hug. There was no tearful reconciliation. But as Jason walked out the door, something in the air shifted. Less weight, more breath. That evening, Nathan pulled the letter from the drawer. He sat on the floor this time, not at the table. The envelope was worn now, bent slightly at the corners. He opened it. His mother's handwriting spilled across the page in long, looping lines. No excuses this time, no vague platitudes, just a slow, stumbling confession. "You were the easy child, the one we thought didn't need as much. That was our mistake. We taught you love had to be earned, that you only mattered when you were useful. I see now what that did to you, and I hate that you had to leave just to survive us. This letter isn't a request for forgiveness. It's just a truth I owed you long ago." Nathan's eyes burned, but he didn't cry. Not exactly. It was more like release, a tightness in his chest uncoiling. He folded the letter slowly, neatly, and then he didn't throw it away. He placed it back in the drawer, not because it defined him, but because it didn't anymore. Days passed, and life, as life does, continued. Sarah met him at the park one Sunday. They walked without urgency, her arm brushing his now and then. He was still learning how to be open, how to not flinch at affection, how to speak about the things that shaped him without shame. He told her about Jason's visit, about the letter. He paused then, glancing sideways. "It's weird. It didn't fix anything, but I feel steadier." Sarah smiled. "Maybe it's not about fixing things. Maybe it's about seeing them clearly for the first time." Nathan reached for her hand. This time, he didn't hesitate. That night, alone in his apartment, Nathan stood by the window, watching the lights flicker on in the buildings across the street. He thought about his past, not with bitterness, but with distance. The version of him who said yes to everything, who believed being needed was the same as being loved. That version was gone now. He was no longer a shadow behind someone else's spotlight. He was Nathan, still healing, still learning, but finally, the main character of his own life.